Sometime about 2 or 3 years ago, my son Chance, who was 8 or 9 at the time, he came up with this game, which, as you can see on the screen, one of those silicone poppets that have been so popular, little fidget toys that kids like to play with. He came up with a game that used this and asked me to play it with him. Essentially, kind of like checkers or chess, you have each player has one side of the board, and he visualized it as kind of like an army battle, and you could press down the poppets to indicate that you had a soldier in a particular spot on the side of the board, and the three on the back row were your captains or officers. And the goal was to capture all of the captains or officers on the other team to win the game. So we tried playing it, but naturally the game kind of fell apart because you couldn't keep track of whose spot belonged to who. Not only is the toy itself multicolored, but just trying to keep track of all that would be impossible. But I never got, I thought, as we were playing, I thought, boy, I wonder if it'd be possible to create a simple game like this in PowerApps. PowerApps isn't really designed for creating games, it's designed for creating business applications. But I thought it was an interesting challenge, and so that always kind of stuck in my mind. And this year I finally found some spare time to devote to that project. So I want to show that to you. This is the outcome of the project. You can see it looks similar, though it has a few more spots there than the silicone version. When the game starts up, it randomly selects who starts first. In this case, it's green, and I can create a new soldier in either of these two rows, but not the middle row, or I can choose to move one of the officer pieces from the back row. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new one just by clicking on it. And then you can see it creates the soldier there and then automatically switches to the other side. You can see the color red shows at the bottom instead of green at the top. So I'm going to create another one for red in this row, and we'll just go back and forth a couple times. And let me show you what happens when a soldier gets captured. You can see if I click on an existing piece, it highlights indicating that it's ready to move to another piece. If I try to move to a piece that's not adjacent, I get a warning that says you can only move to an adjacent piece. So the game keeps track of that. I'm going to go ahead and capture the officer from the red team, and you can see it keeps track of that down here. This number here indicates the number of soldiers that I have left in my army, so I can't add more than that number to the playfield. So watch as I go to add one here for the green team. The number is 6. If I add one, that comes down to 5. We found in earlier versions of the game that unlimited soldiers made the game impossible to win, so that adds a new element of strategy. So let me go ahead and take out all of the green officers just so you can see what happens at the end of the game. Okay, so we have one left. So it shows that red wins, plays a little music at the end. Alright, and then you can press reset game and it resets the game. So let's talk a little bit about how this works. I don't want to get into too much detail because I don't want this video to be super long, but here's what it looks like in the PowerApps editor. You can see how things are organized here on the left. You have the winner splash screen for the winner, which remains invisible until someone wins the game. You have areas for, let's see, what do they call those? containers for red officer, captured red officers, and containers for captured green officers. You have information bar at the bottom, which doesn't show in the final game. That was just for development. Green side, which includes these 3 rows. The middle side, which are the neutral row in the middle, and then the red side, which is the final 3 rows. There's also a move history gallery that keeps, every time a move is made, it captures certain data about that, which does get used in game logic. Again, during development, this gallery was visible so I could see how things were working, but it's invisible for the final product. And then the background shows the color gradient for depending on whose turn it is, and that gradient is actually created using HTML, CSS coding, which is kind of handy to be able to do that in PowerApps. One of the big challenges with creating a game in PowerApps is PowerApps doesn't have it's not like a traditional object-oriented language. You know, it doesn't have that level of programming. It seems to be moving in that direction, but it's not totally there yet. So it's not as easy to create the organizational structure for the data on the back end, as well as the game logic, because you can't create objects with properties and methods. So how I got around that in this particular case, and I know there are a few ways to get around that in PowerApps, but how I chose to do it is in OnStart, I create a collection keeping track of all of the buttons or all of the spaces on the game board, organized by row. So this is row 1, 2, 3, 4, and then position 1, 2, 3. So this piece is 1, 1. This is 1, 2. This is piece 2, 2. This is piece 3, 4, etc. So if you look here in the collection, there is an item, call it a row or an item in the collection with this metadata about that particular location on the board. So this one is the very first one at the top left. It's space 1, 1. The state indicates who it belongs to. In this case, it's green because it has a green captain, a green officer on the spot. It is an officer, so that's set to true. It's on the 0 side of the board, which indicates that it's neutral. This is used to denote in the logic whether or not a new soldier can be formed there. And in this case, even though a soldier exists there now, if there wasn't an officer there, the green side would not be able to create a new soldier there. So that's why it's set to 0. But it indicates a side of the board, so it could be 0, 1, or 2. And then is it currently selected? False. And then it also keeps track of what are the spaces that are adjacent to that space, so that when it's checking to, game logic is checking to see if a player can move from that spot into another spot. If the spot they're trying to move to doesn't appear in this list, then they can't move there. Anyway, that's essentially how that works. Let me move over to the game logic piece. So all of the spaces on the board exist as a button component. And within that component you have the button, and this is what captures the user's click. You have a label, which was used for development purposes. It's invisible from the final product. The circle highlight, when a user clicks on a space, this piece appears to show that it's been selected. The officer captain badge is this little star emblem thing that shows or doesn't show depending on the state of the piece. And then there's shadowing too. So you'll notice that you have shading here in the upper right and in sort of a highlight in the lower left. That is this, and it's a transparent, semi-transparent PNG file that I created in Photoshop, and that just overlays on top of the circle in the background to give a sense of relief. You can see on the board these pieces appear like they're raised above the board, and these ones sort of appear like they're sunken into the board. It's these shadow and highlight overlays that determine that look. And then the circle is the background. This is the color. So whether it's neutral gray or red or green. So the component has 4 custom properties. XX input is the name of the space. So when each of these goes on the board, you can change XX input to be, it attaches the item from the list I showed you earlier, the collection, the item from the button list collection, based on which position that is on the board. So in this case, we feed title 11 into there, and it pulls that record from the list and puts that into the XX input variable so that it can then be used in the logic. On select is really the main property I want to focus on for this discussion, and that's where all the game logic is. And that looks like this. Again, because it's not an object-oriented programming language, it's you kind of have to put all the logic in this one spot, which makes it messy and complicated to navigate, but it does work. It'd be nice to be able to break that up into methods associated with each piece, but it is what it is. And I guess this actually does kind of function like a method since it's a component and this code is attached to each component. But anyway, so this is responsible for checking everything with the game. So when a player selects a piece, it needs to make sure that it's that player's turn, that they actually can select that piece. It needs to make sure that's a neutral piece that's on their side of the board, or that that piece is occupied by one of their soldiers or officers so that they can select it. You know, all that sort of thing. Let's. I'm not going to go through all of it. That would take too long. But let's just look at this section here. So this section gets triggered if the player is trying to add a soldier to the field. And so the first thing that it has to look for is check the state of the piece. If it's 0, so they've clicked on the piece, it's triggering all this code. If the state of that space is 0, that means the space is unoccupied. And so they can place a piece there. It also needs to check if the team has any soldiers left to spawn. That goes back to, they're only allowed 8 total through the game on the field. If they don't have any left, then they can't create a new soldier. Then it has to check that they're trying to create it in the right place. Soldiers cannot be created in the center and back rows, so this line checks for that. Once it meets all that criteria, then it goes through these items to actually create the piece. So it updates the state of the piece using a patch command to change the state of that piece to a 1 or a 2, depending on the player. It plays a little pop sound, so it sounds like a silicone fidget toy. It updates the soldier remaining count, so they lose a soldier from that count because they added it to the field. Adds it to the selection history, and then it switches whose turn it is. And you can see if there was, if it didn't meet the filtering criteria, you get the notifications like you can't create any soldiers here, or you're all out of soldiers if you didn't have any in your arsenal anymore. Anyway, that's essentially it. Just kind of wanted to keep this video short and show that it was possible to create a simple game in PowerApps. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.